Good afternoon. On behalf of Engineers Australia, I'm delighted to welcome you all to our Thought Leader series, Engineering Smart Cities, Leveraging AI Innovation. My name is Megan Purney and I'm the Corporate Engagement Manager here at Engineers Australia. Firstly, in keeping with our customs, Engineers Australia acknowledges the traditional owners of the land and recognises their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay our respects to their cultures and to elders past, present and emerging. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that today's webinar is being hosted with Engineers Australia's industry partner, the University of Technology, Sydney, UTS. Engineering and IT is the largest of the 8 faculties at UTS. UTS is located in central Sydney and is one of Australia's leading universities of technology. It is known for fusing innovation, creativity and technology in its teaching and research, and for being an industry-focused university. UTS has a total enrolment of more than 40,000 students and is rated #1 young university in Australia in both the QS and Times Higher Education rankings. Today, we'll hear from our speakers, followed by a panel discussion and audience Q&A session. And I encourage you all to send your questions through to our speakers via the YouTube chat box during today's presentations. I would now like to welcome our moderator for today, Professor Michael Blumenstein. Professor Blumenstein is currently the Deputy Dean in the Faculty of Engineering and IT at UTS, where he formerly held the positions of Associate Dean and prior to that, the Head of the School of Software. Previously, Professor Blumenstein worked at Griffith University in Queensland, where he accumulated over a decade of experience in leadership roles, including Portfolio Dean of the Sciences Group and Head of the School of ICT. Professor Blumenstein is also an award-winning and internationally recognised expert in the fields of artificial intelligence and pattern recognition. Professor Blumenstein has served on numerous committees in the technology sector and currently serves on the board of the Internet of Things Alliance Australia. Please join me in welcoming Professor Michael Blumenstein.
Thank you, Megan, and welcome again to our viewers. The topic for today's Thought Leaders series is Engineering Smart Cities, Leveraging AI Innovation. This is a topic close to my heart, as I am passionate about the field of artificial intelligence and have myself developed this technology in many engineering applications for nearly 2 decades. AI is being embedded in our daily lives, but there are still tremendous opportunities in leveraging the technology for the benefit of the economy, the engineering industry, and the wider community. Today, we'll be discussing these issues and more with a panel of experts who will spark an exciting conversation about how we can best develop AI technologies to stimulate smart cities now and into the future. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome the Honourable Victor Dominello, MP, the Minister for Customer Service and Digital Government. Minister Dominello trained as a lawyer and was admitted to practice in both the Supreme Court of New South Wales and the High Court of Australia in 1991. He worked as a lawyer for 14 years, where he represented clients in a number of landmark cases. In 1995, Victor was elected as a councillor of Ryde City Council and remained on council until 2004. Victor was pre-selected by the Liberal Party in September 2008 as its candidate for the state by-election in the seat of Ryde and was elected to the New South Wales Parliament. He has served various roles, including Minister for Aboriginal Affairs and Minister for Citizenship and Communities. Assistant Minister for Education and Veterans Affairs was also added to his official title. Following the Baird government's re-election in March 2015, Victor was sworn in as the state's Minister for Innovation and Better Regulation, and in 2017 was appointed Minister for Finance, Services and Property. Please welcome the Honourable Victor Dominello, MP.
Well, thanks very much, Michael, for your warm introduction. Can I also begin by acknowledging country and pay my respects to elders both past and present. Thank Engineers Australia and UTS for your leadership in this regard, and I also extend my thanks and gratitude to distinguished Professor Fang Chen, Professor Michael Blumenstein, and my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Ian Aberman, and the other distinguished panel members for your thought leadership in this area. There's lots to love about engineers, particularly as a Member of Parliament, and I'll tell you why. Because as a Member of Parliament, there's so many lawyers, and I used to be a lawyer by trade. For 15 years I practiced law and commercial litigation primarily. But when you get a whole lot of lawyers in the room, what they focus on are problems. They try to look for weaknesses in cases, and that's one of their skill sets. But engineers, you get a table of engineers in a room and you look for solutions. And quite frankly, I really believe that if we want a healthier parliament, that's state, federal, local, wherever you want to describe it, we need more engineers, more people that are solution orientated. Because I remember very clearly when I tried to get some reform done in the motor vehicle accidents cases, it was just a team of lawyers, team of insurers around the table, and it was very hard progress. But get a whole lot of engineers around the table and people have that open mindset where they are gravitated towards design thinking and solutions. Now, that's great, but when engineers build things and people are at their centre, and that's the critical piece here, building things for people to use, well then that is a great community asset. But if the personal experience, if the customer experience is not part of the design thinking, then nobody will use it, and then you have a classic example of a white elephant. And we've seen that time and time again in governments where they design and build things not with people in mind. So that's another critical element for engineers, particularly as we move into the digital world and how important that is. And again, engineers understand more than anybody else the requirement for assets and utilities to be interconnected, connecting a pipe with a tap, connecting different parts or components of a build. And then at a broader picture, design thinking around how a network operates, a school with a road, with rail. But that's the physical infrastructure. And in New South Wales, we're spending over $100 billion on hard infrastructure assets, road, rail, schools, hospital. And there is an absolute essential element around engineers in making sure the physical infrastructure is connected. But increasingly, it is not so much the tarmac on the road or the bricks and mortar of a school that is important. It's the interconnectivity of the user experience inside the school, inside the hospital, on the road, inside the carriage. That is critical to the journey, critical to the customer experience. And one of the great challenges that we have, not just this decade, but moving forward, is to make sure that we have that interconnectivity. And the critical component of that is data. We have wicked problems where agencies design their own data systems that just don't talk to other data systems, which means there's no interconnectivity, which means that we have disjointed service delivery, which absolutely lead to poor or suboptimal outcomes. And that's why increasingly data engineers are going to be a key component for governments moving forward. If you have a look at the digital world, we can see already how that interface is playing out. One of our flagship pieces of digital infrastructure in New South Wales is the Smart Places strategy. And one of the initiatives out of that is meters or measuring the congestion that relates to smart cities, i.e. people moving about on the roads. We know that about a third or maybe even more of traffic is caused by people going around and around and around. Now, how do we solve that wicked problem? Well, you can't solve anything unless you can see it. And what we're going to do is, for example, start with putting smart sensors in every disabled parking spot in New South Wales and loading zone, and eventually build it out right across. But obviously first target the high use cases, the main street, the high street, and each major city or town, and then move it out into other parking locations. Because once you can see where there is a place to park, you'll go and park there. If there's not a place, you're not going to waste your time going around and around and around looking for that lucky break. But it's not just smart sensors in terms of parking. It is smart irrigation. It is smart air quality sensors. It's garbage trucks moving around and collecting not just garbage, but collecting data in relation to where potholes are. So they can feed it back in, and then we get the civil engineers to get out there and fix that road or fix whatever it requires. That's where we are moving increasingly, and that's why that data interface is critical. Otherwise, again, disjointed service delivery. One of the challenges, I think, moving forward is to make sure that we build or create a place where all of these ideas can come together. And for example, a frustration of mine is there are so many great ideas out there in the smart places territory, but I don't think there is one place, one oversight, one board where people can go to as a single source of truth for all good ideas in relation to smart places. And I think that is a design flaw in what we have done, in that we need to create a place where government, business, researchers, NGOs all come together in a structured way around smart places so that we can get the taxonomy right, so we can get the data standards right, so we can get into connectivity as we move forward in terms of service delivery. Now, that's the physical world, that's the digital world, and I think we're going to quickly move into the meta world. I guess in many ways the meta world is where the physical atom and the digital atom collide to make the meta atom, but it requires both. It does really require data from both sources, and that's why we're building out the digital twin. It's the largest here in New South Wales, the largest in the Southern Hemisphere, and we're increasingly building that out with a lot more money. Just in the recent round, from memory, I think we put another $18 million into it. And this is where, again, engineers are critical, not just your traditional mechanical engineers or your civil engineers, but increasingly your biomedical engineers and your data engineers. It is the engineers that will fundamentally build the way our society, our cities perform and function so that we can have an enhanced lifestyle and reduce suffering. If we can do that in the future, then we've done our job. So can I thank you again for all the work that you do. You engineers give me hope that we will get stuff done, and we get it done in a way that will improve our way of life. So thank you again for having me, and I hope you get a lot of insights out of the panel discussion to follow.
Thank you, Minister Dominello, for your insights. I'd now like to welcome Dr. Ian Aberman. Dr. Ian Aberman is a digital economy thought leader and a regular speaker about big data, broadband-enabled services, and the impact of technology on society. In addition to being an associate industry professor in the Faculty of Engineering and IT at UTS, Ian is also the New South Wales Government's Chief Data Scientist, working within the Department of Customer Service. He chairs an 11-member New South Wales Artificial Intelligence Advisory Committee that is advising the state government on how it should use the technology. The committee will also develop a world-first AI assurance framework for government projects. Ian also chairs the New South Wales Smart Places Advisory Council, a group which is supporting New South Wales to bring to life real-world projects that will drive the state's Smart Places agenda. Ian has nearly 30 years' experience in the information and communication technology sector and has led organisations that deliver products and services that have reached millions of people around the world. Please welcome Dr. Ian Aberman.
Thank you very much for having me today. I'd actually like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we're all meeting. In my case, it's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. My name is Ian Aberman. I'm the Chief Data Scientist for New South Wales Government and also an industry professor in smart cities at the University of Technology in Sydney. I also spend some of my time looking at the world of standards, in particular those related to the fundamentals of what we mean around smart cities, AI, data sharing, trustworthiness, and the complex systems that ultimately underpin smart cities. Now, our topic today is AI in smart cities, and it's hard to imagine anything more complex than a city. It is the most complex thing that human beings have ever created through their entire history of civilization. Cities are complex. And when we talk about making cities smart, which means that we are better able to direct services, more personalized services, better able to change the way we utilize the resources of a place, it also has really substantial dimensions of complexity that we need to overcome. Cities historically have been built out of concrete and steel, out of tarmac and the hard materials without necessarily building in the digital smart part that allows us to better understand, better think through what happens when things go wrong, or better understand when things go wrong, or explore those what-if scenarios and allow us to optimize how we use a city or how we use a place. AI, of course, is the best tool we've got to make sense of all the data that we need to understand, to predict, to explore, to analyze. AI allows us to make sense of all of that data. It helps us better understand when things are going wrong, helps us better understand how we can safely and appropriately personalize services for individuals, how we can better understand how we can optimize the use of things like traffic flows or the use of pedestrian flows. So as we move forward in our smart places journey in New South Wales, because places are important, it's not just the cities, it's about the regional and remote parts of New South Wales as well. As we move forward in our smart places strategy in New South Wales, what we'll continue to see is increasing use of high-grained, high-specificity data sets, increased use of people-centric data sets, and we need to do that in a way which is safe, which protects privacy, which is ethically appropriate, and is also in a way which is transparent about how we do it so that we can continue to explore and examine and better personalize services. Our panel today is going to examine a range of different issues around the interaction of smart data and AI, and underpinning everything is our commitment to do it in a secure way, do it in a transparent way, do it in an ethical way, and do it in a way which is privacy preserving. Throw AI into the mix, and then you've got some really powerful ways of building on those fundamental principles to deliver better services to people. You all know that New South Wales released its Smart Places strategy in 2020. We released our AI strategy in 2020, and we released our data sharing strategy in 2021. And that may seem a little bit like cart before the horse to release smart places and AI strategies before we release the data strategy. But ultimately, data is the big game. And we could see smart cities, smart places, and AI as use cases of data. So as we move forward into 2022, it's really about consolidating all of those different strategic components, activating place, making sure that the work that we do to bring places alive through an understanding of data, bring places alive through the personalization of service, through optimization of physical built assets, is done in a way which is not only safe and ethical and transparent and privacy preserving, but really makes a difference to people who live in these places. So I look forward to the rest of the panel. Thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you, Dr. Ian Aberman, for your insights. I'd now like to welcome our next speaker, Distinguished Professor Fang Chen. Distinguished Professor Fang Chen is an award-winning, internationally recognised leader in artificial intelligence and data science. She is passionately innovative in her work, architecting and implementing data-driven solutions to problems posed in governments and industries. Her experience in solving these real-life complex problems in large-scale networks span across transport, water, energy, and agriculture. Fang is also actively involved in promoting ethical, human-centered AI. Fang leads multidisciplinary teams of experts together with whom she has won major scientific and industry awards on the national level. In terms of personal recognition, Fang is the winner of the Oscar of Australian Science, the Australian Museum Eureka Prize in 2018 for excellence in data science. She is the Australian Water Association's Water Professional of the Year, awarded in 2016. She's the 2021 winner of the Australia and New Zealand Women in AI Award in Infrastructure and a 2021 winner of the New South Wales Premier's Prize for Science and Engineering. Fang is a member of the inaugural New South Wales Government AI Advisory Committee. She also serves on the expert panel of the Singapore National Science Foundation and on several boards, including ITS Australia. She has 350 publications and 30 patents in 8 countries. Currently, Fang is the Executive Director of Data Science at the University of Technology, Sydney, and the Executive Director of the UTS Data Science Institute. Please welcome Professor Fang Chen.
Thank you, Michael, for the introduction. Now, it's my great pleasure to talk about some AI applications in smart places. I borrowed this chart to illustrate that smart cities or smart places actually add digital intelligence to their urban world and use it to resolve the public problems. And of course, the purpose is to achieve a higher quality of life. If we look at the right-hand side, you can see that the few layers of smart places, smart cities application. The bottom layer, which is the traditional infrastructure layer, which could be physical or social, and that consists of the connected network, consists of sensor network, etc. And if we're looking at the middle level, which is smart applications, that is strongly supported by AI and data analytics to provide the insights, provide intelligence so that we can act on. Of course, don't underestimate the top layer, which is adoption and usage, often lead to better decisions and behavior changes. So we mentioned a lot in terms of AI, what AI can do. I just try to list some of the points for food for thoughts of how AI is going to help in smart places. Examples like evidence-based decision for better governance or management, such as cross-domain planning, like a city planning with energy, with transport, with parking, as an integrated fashion. We have points which can address around positive impact to the environment, reduce emission, make city more efficient. For example, optimize energy, water, and resource, smart parking, smart bins, etc. Make city safer and more resilient. Example like a security surveillance system, as well as a coordinated incident and disaster management. So the last not least is more connected communities to use understanding human behavior, choices people make, and community sentiment, for example. Now I wanted to use the opportunity to use for examples, concrete example, to illustrate the usage and the benefit of AI in smart city, smart places. The first example I pick is around water pipe leak detection and the failure prediction. We all know that a water pipe is buried underneath for 100 years or maybe some 200 years. And the material, different material interacted with the soil, interacted with the water, and then, change the aspects and that can cause the leak and the failure. The practice we had is together with water utilities, in this case is the Sydney Water, is first thing use AI to prioritize the risk, to estimate a bit of risk of the pipe network, and pick the priority areas, which is a high risk area, to put sensors in in this case is acoustic sensors. Acoustic sensors are buried underneath, next to the water pipe, can listen some of the sound or through the signals, and then pick up the abnormal signals to identify as the potential alert for leaks, and then operations team can go to find it. This is how the analytics tool look like. Apart from the basic attributes of pipes like material, length, diameter, etc., we also looked into topography and looked at the tree canopy map, which tree roots have a bad impact towards water pipes. And the left-hand side, the bottom, you can see the different color of dots, which is prioritized, the pipe for maintenance according to different risks. This is the 18-month benefits of applying this technology, and since around 400 kilometers of distribution main in Sydney CBD and then 3 other pressure zones that already resulted in 3,500 megaliter water saving, which is more than 1,200 something Olympic pool size, and $8 million. Of course, with more sensors embedded into the network, and more savings will be expected. Next example I want to use is in the train network. Of course, the patronage and the revenue is prior to COVID. However, regardless, there's for Sydney trains is more than 1,600 kilometers of a track need to be maintained or in a good condition for safety and on-time running. If you look at this, is the traditional track inspection process, which is the left-hand side. You have a trains, and you have a camera installed underneath the train, and then when train is running, just look down the track and get those images, and the human inspectors can flipping those images in office and prioritize to see where the defects are and send to the on-ground inspection. So in this case, AI, particularly the advanced computer vision, utilize those camera video footage to automatically detect the defects area and send those highlighted, those marking area for human inspectors to have a look. So that in that way, it can accelerate the inspection process, also extend the inspection area to a great extent. I can show you in next slide, which you see, this is in reality how it runs. You see the images floating, and then the bending box just mark the concerned areas, particularly for missing bolts, nuts, and then, all those defects which need to be fixed. And you on the right-hand side, you can see the heat map of detection for that set period. We tried on. So the next example I want to talk is for regionals. So data analytics for regional economic zone. In this case, is Albury and Wodonga, which is across the border of New South Wales and Victoria. And in the particular through the COVID and the population growth in the regional areas has increased quite a bit. And the big question asked is whether the dwellings or houses are enough for population growth. Where are the housing pressure hotspots? And the other question is around visitor economy, is how we can see the people movement around the different regional areas, and particularly around visitor experience, whether they are satisfied, etc. This shows some early result of analyzing the housing pressure. Left-hand side, you can see Albury-Wodonga zone, which is the blue dots is low regional housing pressure area, and the red one is the high housing pressure under this analysis. And the right-hand side is the models estimates and forecast the population for the region. and also provides housing capacity for a given area over time. So all those facilitate, smart planning and for future, which is all attributed to AI as a backbone to provide those intelligent insights. The last example I want to quickly run through is around digital twins. We know digital twins is a digital replica of the real world, and digital twin foundation is set up to collect, curate, and fuse or present or visualize different spatial temporal data in the real domain. The powerful thing around digital twin is how utilizing data to tell the stories about today or yesterday, today, and then hopefully to optimizing for tomorrow. So on top of the pretty pictures, 3D representation, all those ones probably can be seen in various different system prototype now. One of the key challenges is how to use the real life data to provide high fidelity simulation, enable what if scenario planning. Of course, the machine learning and AI identify, stratify the emerging risks and critical events, and then in real time, plus predictive analysis to foresee what's going to happen in future, and eventually embedded with optimization to provide a good suggestion or recommendation for the operational decision support. To that end, we also build a digital twin for city planning and operations, which utilizing real-time data and do the simulation, do the scenario planning, and then to help to understand what if scenario, and if you do so, and how the city would look like, how the operations would look like. And if people are interested in to see a demo, this is email, you can contact me and we can arrange a session for that. In summary, AI has been applied to various different scenarios or applications around the smart places, and already demonstrate a very powerful, strength in getting intelligence and help us to navigate future or future-proof, and in our planning, our maintenance, in get accessibility, a lot of application, you name it. And we look forward to work with all the society and citizens, and including all the audience here, to amplify the power of AI to make our places smarter. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Professor Fang, for your insights. I'd now like to welcome our next speaker, Mr. Gary Edstein. Gary Edstein is a Senior Vice President and CEO for Australia, responsible for DHL Express operations in Australia and Papua New Guinea. Gary has worked in the transport industry for 45 years, initially for 12 years with Trans-Australia Airlines, where he was National Accounts Manager. He joined DHL in 1986 as Sales Manager for Victoria. In 2000, Gary transferred to Tokyo to establish a new DHL logistics group, Global Customer Logistics, of which he became a director. He returned to Australia at the end of 2001 as Project Director of Deutsche Post WorldNet, responsible for the Hewlett-Packard logistics contract held by Deutsche Post for Asia Pacific. Gary was appointed CEO and Senior Vice President Oceania for DHL International in 2003. In recognition for his contribution to the industry, Gary was named Transport and Logistics Executive of the Year at the CEO Magazine's 2016 Executive of the Year Awards. Please welcome Gary Edstein.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation. What I'd like to first of all put into context our partnership with UTS. We started this partnership a few years ago, and we're exploring some, I think, very interesting projects together. But before I start, I would like to just give you an outline as to who we are. DHL Express is part of the Deutsche Post group of businesses. Deutsche Post acquired us back in 2003. Deutsche Post has 4 major divisions. We'll do revenues of approximately 80 billion euro. We have about 570,000 employees globally, and we have an air fleet of about 280 freighters. Obviously a large postal business in Europe under Deutsche Post. We are number 1 in contract logistics through DHL supply chain, which is warehousing and contract logistics. International Express, and that's cross-border express services. We have a global forwarding division, which is air freight and ocean freight, and we also have an e-commerce division. So all those divisions are represented here in Australia, and we have approximately 7,000 employees in Australia. If we look at our purpose of the group, our purpose is to connect people and improve lives. Our vision is we are the logistics company for the world, and we've embarked on a strategy out to 2025. It's called Delivering Excellence in a Digital World. So what we're doing is digitalising where we can in all our processes to provide a better customer experience and also a better employee experience, and improve our efficiencies where we can. So we want to accelerate the pace of digitalisation. We want to modernise our IT backbone, exploit new technologies, and we want to scale our business models, but focusing on our core. And I thought a good example of this is in Australia. We have obviously the tyranny of distance. We've got population density. For example, we move approximately 100,000 shipments a day into or out of Australia. We have 7 gateways. So we've got a very significant challenge to develop the infrastructure for the future. It's also driven by the growth of e-commerce. So it's not just catering for the major capitals, but significant growth in regional Australia as well. And what we need to do is use data much better in making sure that we develop this infrastructure for the future. So our partnership with UTS, it's about 2 years since we embarked on partnering with UTS. We've put together some fairly key projects that we're working on right now. I'll just go through a few of those. First of all, we've got a project called Banned Exports. We're working with some of the key regulators, such as the Australian Border Force and also the Australian Federal Police. This is where we're focusing on embargoed and sanctioned products that we have the risk of leaving Australia without authorisation. And this is where we're looking at using data to make sure that these shipments do not leave Australia. The other key project is first and last mile optimisation. Again, using route optimisation to work out the best infrastructure that we can put together here for our first and last mile activities. We have another key project called Inbound Security, again working with significant amount of data that we gather to make sure that illicit product or illicit goods do not enter our country, and making sure that we can stop that at origin rather than trying to stop it at destination. We're also very keen to work with UTS on internships, making sure that we're bringing in the right skill set for our future workforce, and again working with UTS on the new skills that we will require in our business. And then we obviously are keen to explore the likes of robotics, also delivery and pickup in air domestic and road domestic, and then the environmental aspects with respect to sustainability with electric vehicles and smart buildings. So they're the key projects that we're working on with UTS. We're pretty excited with how we've progressed so far, and we're very keen to have a very bright future going forward. So thanks again for inviting me to this webinar and panel, and I'll finish off now. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary, for your insights, and indeed thanks to all our panelists who spoke and provided their views on this very interesting topic. We will now bring our speakers together for a discussion panel, and during this session we will take questions from you, our audience. If you'd like to submit a question, please do so via the chat box, and please ensure you provide your name and who the question is for. We will, however, begin with some direct questions to the panel. But I'd like to add that these questions have also been sourced partially from those that were submitted during the course of registration. So most of them are very much audience questions. I'd also like to just add that, that the Honourable Minister Victor Dominello will be joining us back here again at around 5:30 p.m. To join the panel discussion. So, great to see everyone online, and I'd just like to run through a few sort of housekeeping items. What I'll do is I'll open up with some. I'd really appreciate any panel member jumping in to start off with their responses, and of course there'll just be a couple of questions that are more to everyone, and then we'll drill down with some more specific questions. So I'd just like to, as an overview to the first question, and just sort of leading on from everyone's comments during their individual views on the topic. The digital age obviously has brought significant advances to society, and this has happened through the advent of groundbreaking technologies. And of course, in the context of smart cities, this has led to a rethink on how we create new technologies to benefit those cities and the people that reside there. So I think the design and deployment of smart city strategies by leveraging technologies such as AI really provide us with some great new avenues for economic development, for knowledge creation, for making people's lives better, and for capacity building. So just as a first question, and again, most of these have been sourced from registrants who've joined the panel, I'd like to kick off by asking, in your experience as an esteemed panel, what do you believe will be the most beneficial technology for smart cities in the future? Who'd like to take that one first? Jump in, don't be shy.
Let me jump in. As the fuzziest member of this community, I feel at least I should offer some bits in the form of voice. It's interesting, smart cities, data is clearly the thing that makes cities smart. And I think the technology which will have the greatest impact is actually the ability to share data in a privacy-preserving way, or share data in a way which is appropriate for the uses we're intending to share. So whilst we talk about IoT as being really important. We talk about 5G as being really important. We talk about multifunctional poles as being really important. The infrastructure that allows appropriate data sharing in real time with temporal and spatial granularity, which is appropriate, is probably the fundamental that we at least need to get right. And once we get that right, then I think a whole lot of other really exotic and more interesting technologies might come along in terms of being important. But I think that one's really fundamental.
Thanks, Ian. Any other thoughts from the panel?
I probably just build on what Ian just said, that and also Minister mentioned that smart cities creating a one, board, single source of truth, which is to a systematic, synchronized approach. I think in order to building that, as Ian mentioned, so we have sensing, we have 5G to connect them together. And one important aspect is to draw the intelligence across the board from the integrated data. Particularly, we're talking about the beauty or advantage of smart cities technology is provide cross sector or multi-sector joint planning. And by realizing that one, the AI, which is a topic of today, and the machine learning or data science, all these ones have significant contribution to help to redesign or planning in a connected fashion, so that the city can be run in a more efficient or sustainable way, etc.
Thanks, Fang. Gary, do you want
Can
to?
I just add? Can I just add, Michael? Some of the examples I put in my presentation, which was banned exports and banned imports, and the comment that Ian made about data sharing. I think it's critical now that, especially with the regulators, that we look at data sharing in a timely manner and very proactively. And those two projects that we're working on right now is all about making sure that we can share that data with the regulators to make sure that these types of illicit imports or banned exports don't come into the country or don't leave the country. So data sharing, which used to be quite antiquated, is now, I think, definitely going to revolutionise that area.
That's great, and really complements what I'd like to bring up for the next question. So everyone's answers actually are going to feed into this next question, which again is from our participants who registered. It's a bit of a long one, but I bear with me. It's a question that touches on the data element. So the question goes: given cities evolve over time, and there are ongoing maintenance and growth elements, and they don't always occur as planned. So what is the panel's view on this continual updating and of future planning expansion based on ongoing data collection and monitoring once cities are in operation? Are there things we can do now to allow us to more easily cope with those coming changes in the future?
Again, I think another clear example is what's happened through the last 2 years with COVID and the buying, the different buying behaviours of our customers and our particular industry. It's really developed this enormous e-commerce drive. So we've been growing relatively well, and then we had this COVID incident, and the whole dynamics have changed. And so we've had to reset a lot of our forecasting and our whole change of our models. So yeah, I think just a good example is how COVID has changed the whole future of our business.
That's correct. I think COVID has definitely changed how we approach cities as well. Any comments, Fang or Ian?
Michael, I'm going to jump in and say that unfortunately I'm going to say data sharing again, and that will probably be the answer to most questions you ask me. Everybody's walked down a street and seen road that's just been freshly sealed, dug up again not too long later, or lines marked on the road to say these are all the areas we're planning to dig up this newly bit of tarmac road. And ultimately it's because different users of cities don't necessarily share data in a way which allows for that longer term planning. One of the points is that cities are never done. You never arrive at a finished city. It's always a work in progress. So the ability to better understand the city from a data perspective, to create digital twins, the sort of work that Fang has been doing, creating really detailed digital twins, which would allow you to do the design, the plan, the construct, the operate, the maintain, and to share that information in a meaningful way between different parts of the city that need access to the curbside or need access to sealed components or have differing construction agendas or differing optimization agendas. The ability to do that at scale is something which is potentially revolutionary, and we've seen a good start. I mentioned the work that Fang's been doing around work like water pipe maintenance prediction is exactly the sort of thing that many users of the cities need to be able to interact through, as well as be able to draw information from, in order to ensure that we are best utilising the built infrastructure in a city, and not only from a long-term perspective, but also even from a day-to-day perspective.
Thanks, Ian. Fang,
Thanks,
you were
Ian.
mentioned a couple of times there.
Yes, I love the water pipe example as always. And, at the moment, we put in the acoustic sensors, of course, together with the city water. That's in about 4 zones, 400 kilometers or something. And the plan is absolutely expand that scale and to implement more and more sensing network. Those ones will help with more data collection and also continuous monitoring of the situation. So expand from that one in general, I think is more and more sensor input into our digital planning platform, whatever it's going to be. That will provide the ability of tracking the current situation and tracking the condition and provide the potential into we call simulations or scenario plannings, and bring the planning element in. This is current situation, and then what if this one and will look like this one. All this one brings together now realistic replay or pre-play of the future may look like. I think that will add into extraordinary value and make our work more efficient, and you see something before you actually develop something.
Thanks, Fang. I might now direct some questions to specific members of the panel, but I'll do a bit of a rotation here. So I might start with Ian. I suppose you touched upon this earlier, Ian, and I think one of the questions from our registered participants is, how do you make sure AI and smart cities are secure in terms of cyber threats?
That's a really, really good question, and that is one of the most important questions that we have to face. Again, just like cities, our cybersecurity position is never arrived at. We've never got a destination and say, all right, we're done now with cybersecurity. It's always going to be an ongoing activity. And whether it's a piece of infrastructure that could potentially be inappropriately manipulated, we heard about some cases last year where valves are being turned on or off in a water treatment plant in the US, whether it's that sort of cyber physical infrastructure or whether it's access to data, knowing and getting access to information that's inappropriate because it's sensitive or because it's personal, is something that we must be constantly vigilant of. So my probably very weak answer is it's an ongoing race. It's something that I know that New South Wales government puts a lot of effort into, and of the recently announced Digital Restart Fund, about a quarter quarter of the $1.6 billion originally was specifically dedicated to cybersecurity. And in most cybersecurity situations, we know it's people are the weak link, people who forget passwords or who share information they shouldn't necessarily share, whether deliberately or not. It tends to be people. So there's a lot of focus on upskilling people. There's a lot of focus on helping people understand data governance and governance when accessing bits of infrastructure. And I can tell you that again, in New South Wales government, it's all now mandatory training on an annual basis that we look at data security, cyber security, and also appropriate use of data. But I'm sorry, it's not a great answer, but yeah, part of it is that it's an ongoing activity and we need to keep investing in it.
Thanks, Ian. Does anyone else want to add anything to that, or panel okay? Well, I might just flick to the next question. And look, we're cyber and issues around the security of smart cities and just cities in general will come up again. But just a question for Fang here. How important is it to undertake research in this area? So, the overlap between AI and applied to engineering, and and how important is it to realise sort of benefits for smart cities in the engineering sector?
Thanks, Michael. That's a great question too. I think smart cities, even we're talking about there are many different technologies. We feel that a lot of the things have been done. However, on the other side is really a new concept of producing a synchronized, one platform or one approach which you can load various different data from different sectors and contemplate the interactions between the sectors in the aspects of city planning, maintenance, monitoring, and provide a safe and more efficient running operation of the city. Take just build on the examples Ian just alluded to. For example, the on the ground you dig out many times. Not only we need to synchronize the agencies, including different utilities from fiber to water, from gas to electricity. Not only cross all those agencies' data, but also understand the business decision process, how they actually interact with each other. So the point I'm trying to make is it requires design, requires testing the feasibility around a complex system and the network, and validate certain approaches and the performance, and then eventually wrap around the risk mitigation solutions, etc. All those ones is not only utilizing off-the-shelf technology, but a lot of topics requires a thorough study and research into that. And then, so it's very, very important to understand the role of research in these whole areas to develop smart cities, smart places technology to realize the benefit.
Thanks, Fang, and I'd just like to welcome back Minister Dominello. Thank you for joining the panel. Good to see you. And this might be a bit cheeky, but is it okay if I start with a question for you, Minister, if I might direct one to you? This is an interesting one. We were just talking, Minister, about the integration of new technologies and AI, and we're talking about cybersecurity. But this one's a question that sort of talks about the balance of technology with real life, in a sense. And the question is, how can cities integrate technology while preserving traditional culture? Do you have any thoughts on that, Minister?
Oh, the opportunities are endless. I posted something recently on LinkedIn in relation to digital driver's license, for example, and somebody reported back saying, or commented back saying, wouldn't it be great if on your digital driver's license you can say, live at Meadowbank, but also add an additional field, live on Gadigal country, Now, obviously there must be some absolute minimum standards for regulators, but if you really identify or you wish to celebrate Indigenous culture, why wouldn't you put that on your digital driver's license? So that's just a small example of how we can actually use technology to engage. And that's not to speak to the augmented or mixed reality that will really come of its own in the next 3, 4, 5 years when we start getting smart glasses and we really do have a mixed experience. And then again, imagine walking along a beachfront, knowing that you're on land, and then understanding in an immersive way that these are the stories, the traditions of where you are. So I just think the ability to use technology to preserve culture and to celebrate culture is really going to be an area of true joy in the future.
Great answer, Minister. I think it's really good to get those type of questions that are more focused not just on the technology itself, but actually what it means, for people, and particularly also Indigenous peoples and other members who take part in smart cities. I'd like to change a little bit in a gear in terms of the next question, and I'd like to direct this to Gary. This is an interesting one. It also comes from one of our registered participants. How can growing urban freight activities be best accommodated in planning smart cities and making use of AI capabilities?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I think a good example of what's happened with our business is we were traditionally a business to business model, and over the last several years we've had to move rapidly because of the explosion of e-commerce more to a business to consumer model. Our residential deliveries now are growing significantly, at more than 30-40% of our business, whereas traditionally the majority was to a business address. So we've had to obviously use the data that we've collected to look at how do we deliver more to residential addresses. How do we build a collection network where we're using service stations, where we're using news agencies, where we want to now use a lot more other retail networks to provide more collection points, especially out in the regional areas. We've now moved to, for example, weekend deliveries, predominantly on a Sunday, because a lot of our volume comes in over the weekend from various parts of the world, and our mix of volume going out into regional Australia has now surged significantly. We're now delivering more volume into, say, the Central Coast versus what we do in Canberra. So data is going to be critical for us to build the infrastructure that we'll require for the future. And the other one is obviously Western Sydney Airport, where we're going to have to build significant facilities around that airport, because our freighters will be arriving into Sydney early hours of the morning because it's curfew free, and then we'll have to then sort all that freight and get it out for final mile delivery during the day. So it's going to be critical how we build our facilities and our infrastructure around Western Sydney Airport.
Thanks for that, Gary. Yeah, it's really important for planning, particularly as we just expand across the Western Sydney, and there's just so much activity going on in the next 5-10 years. We need to keep this in mind with smart cities and our whole smart city agenda. I just want to go back. We have a lot of talk about data up to this point, and there's another data question. I'd like to direct this one at Ian, if I might. So, it sort of touches upon some elements that have already been discussed, but smart cities would appear to be highly dependent on the collection of a massive data set from its citizens. How will the drive to smart cities impact our privacy, and what compromises would we be expected to make to achieve smart cities?
Yeah, so that again is one of those fundamental questions. The general philosophy is we're going to do data sharing, collection data sharing, which preserves privacy, is done in an ethical way, it's done securely, and is done transparently. As foundational pillars, they are useful principles to try and build into place. The practical reality, of course, is that we need to understand what we've got. We need to understand whether the data is sensitive and personal, whether it's not sensitive and personal, whether it's sensitive and not personal, or neither sensitive nor personal. And you can imagine that data which is highly aggregated can fall into those different categories, and data about different subjects can fall into those different categories. The second thing to do is to understand what we're going to do with the data, what is the purpose we're using it for, and then what restrictions and frameworks do we need to put in place. So, of course, New South Wales government uses a whole range of different data sets, sensitive and personal, and all the other combinations, and putting in place the frameworks necessary for the appropriate use of that data by appropriately technically skilled domain expert people and with a clear purpose within an authorizing framework is the general approach. But in reality, what we're looking to do is systematically build data sharing frameworks in place that recognize what we've got, why we're using it, for what purpose, and then to ensure that we're telling people that we're using data and what we're using it for, and to ensure that we're not using data for reasons that we inadvertently either don't need or don't have the frameworks in place for. So as part of the New South Wales Smart Places strategy was a customer data charter, which essentially says this is how we're going to use data, this is what we're going to use it for, this is how we're not going to use it. And as we continue on our data maturity journey, which New South Wales has been on for a very long time now, is to build those systematic, repeatable frameworks of data sharing, which acknowledge temporal, spatial, personal relationship parameters in a data set, and make sure that we're only doing with it what we said we would do, for the purposes we said we would do with it, and to ensure that we're being as transparent as possible about the use of data. And ultimately, feedback mechanisms from the community will help us to ensure that we're staying people-centered, outcomes-focused, and benefits-focused for the community.
Thanks, Ian. I think being people-centric and bringing benefits to the population that lives in cities is what we're all trying to achieve, and certainly that's really important points that you raised. There's a few more questions coming through, and I'm wanted to make sure we won't be able to get them all, but I'm trying to get as many through as possible. This one is directed to Fang. What do undergraduates and or students need to know to work in this field? And I suppose that's the interface between AI and engineering.
I guess we're already talking a lot around data. So from a graduate's perspective, probably some way of understand the data or some signals or understand some patterns. Those ones are one of the essential part of the building the knowledge and the curriculum or understanding in this area. The other one is literacy from STEM to data literacy of how you're going to operating the understanding, visualization, presentation, decision making around data-driven, objective decisions. Those have a lot of skill sets that wrap around those ones. And then, of course, in order to achieve systematic planning of in the smart city or smart places, these areas, I think a multidisciplinary approach is also very important. So we not only requires the data engineers or a data scientist, we also need chemical engineers, civil engineers, a lot of different engineers working together as a team to achieve certain outcomes.
Thank you, Fang. Thanks a lot. I want to change gears again. There's actually a question come through from the audience, actually, and I might ask Minister Dominello if he'd want to tackle this one. It's a question which I think you did touch on a little bit in your opening. Are you aware of any AI or technology initiatives for analysing and improving city experience for the mobility impaired across all modes?
In terms of AI and assisting mobility across all modes, well, I don't have a specific example in terms of a technology, but I can give you an example of what we're doing in relation to mobility. So, for example, we're rolling out sensors for disability car spots. So we can start identifying right across New South Wales where those spots exist. And you can't manage what you can't see. So that's an example. But no, I can't think of anything else specifically.
No worries. Thanks, Minister. I do want to capture one point you mentioned there. You can't sort of address things that you can't see. So the theme is coming back to collecting data and the importance of that, and the use of obviously sensors and the use of data for the purpose of using it to make people's lives better. But then there's this counterbalance around how will the data be used and so forth. So there is actually a question I'd like to pose to Ian, and it relates to data sharing, which Ian will be pleased to know. The question is, while data sharing is the way to go, it also poses the highest risk from a cyber threat point of view. Are there any comments that you can add to that question, Ian?
Yeah, so the traditional way of thinking about data sharing is to bring it all into one place and then use it, and effectively creating a honeypot situation where you have these really valuable data sets. Increasingly, the trend is to think about distributed analytics, so using a data fabric to send your analysis off to the data itself, only share the metadata, which tends to, it certainly addresses that concentration problem right up front. But that still isn't quite enough from a cybersecurity perspective, because of course, the moment data is being used, it's potentially usable or attackable by someone else. So increasingly, we're looking at privacy-enhancing technologies. Just a quick plug for the PETS 22 event, which is in Sydney, the week starting the 11th of July. New South Wales will be running a workshop there around privacy-enhancing technologies. But these sorts of technologies, think about data at rest, data in motion, and data as it's being consumed and used. So we have heard about homomorphic encryption and such technologies for some time. They're becoming real. Combining that with data fabrics and that distributed analytical approach, this is very much the thinking. There's also the principle, those of you who did software development years and years ago will know about the information hiding concept. So only take as much information as you actually need and no more in order to carry out your activity. So the combination of these different parameters is the sort of stuff we're thinking about. When thinking about the privacy part of things, there's also some really good thought going into these data sharing frameworks around information about people, information about where people are, when people are in that location, and also relationship information. And so what we've been trying to do when sharing data as open data, such as, for example, the COVID data sets of confirmed cases and testing, we deliberately splice apart data sets along the dimensions of about people, about time, about space, and about relationship in order to try and ensure that we minimize that risk of re-identification. So in that whole concept of security of data, so not only physical layer techniques, but also minimizing information and minimizing information crossover, if you like, that would assist with re-identification. And just one point actually to the question you asked the Minister about AI, wayfinding is one of those areas that is really increasingly being used by transport and other folks to help people who are either mobility impaired or some have some other sort of disability to better navigate around the city. And it's increasingly then being joined up with bus timetables and a whole lot of other microservices in order to try and create a more personalised experience for someone who's trying to navigate their way through the city.
Thanks, Ian. They're very good points, and particularly the last point there. Again, we have to remember that smart cities are still there for the people and for making their lives better. One of the things that is a theme that's come up twice now in the comments from the audience currently, and I'm going to open this one up to the whole panel, but anyone feel free to jump in. It's recurring around how can smart cities be smart in energy management and or solid waste management? So as I said, it's a recurring one, the whole energy management piece and waste management. Does anyone have any, who wants to jump in there from the panel?
I'm happy to jump in to give a comment. So absolutely, there's quite some work around energy management. Example is, for example, water pumping consume about 5% of the energy globally. How you pump the water smartly, and at the time you need to maintain the pressure as well as you send the required chemicals across the network to maintain the water quality. So there are plenty of work have been doing around that one to maintain the effective, efficient pumping, save the energy while keep the water quality across the network. Around waste management, it's the same. So we probably have already seen some smart bin collections. You know where is sensing when is the time to collect the bins, and around other waste areas. Wastewater. What is the asset related to wastewater? For example, maintain the water pipes not corroded. And also the certain chemicals are needed to dosed into the sewer pipes so that not keeping too much odor out, etc. So overall, I think this is a very active area because related to citizens' life and also related to efficiency of the cities. Thank you.
Thank you, Fang.
Michael, can I just a comment?
Yeah, please, Gary, go ahead.
I think corporates like DHL, they have to play a major part in obviously zero emissions by 2050. And when you look at strategy, for example, with Deutsche Post, DHL, we've made a commitment that all our new facilities have to be carbon neutral from here on. Facilities that are on an investment or capex basis that are $10 million or more. And with respect to our fleet of vehicles, we've made a commitment that 70% must be electric vehicles by 2030. And we've also got a very interesting project when it comes to aviation fuel, sustainable aviation fuel. There's a huge focus on making sure that we reduce our biggest carbon emitter, which is our freighter network. So corporates, they need to obviously play a major role in being smart with energy usage.
Thanks for that, Gary. That's great. I've got a question here that's, and I'll go back to individual questions.
I think the minister wanted to say something.
Sorry,
Michael.
Thanks. Just very quickly. Thanks. Sorry, Michael. Sorry. Just very quickly. I was having a discussion with the building commissioner the other day in relation to how we build buildings that are carbon neutral, and again, it's an age-old problem. Unless you can measure it, you're just going to get some expert going out there and rule of thumb. I think the score of this building is X, Y, Z. But if you truly put a measurement on every major building block of that building, where the timber's coming from, was it sustainably grown, etc., 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 then you can really start understanding the true value of that building in terms of its carbon neutrality. And I know that the building commissioner is starting to talk about using blockchain, as are some countries in Europe, to establish that system. And again, if we could do that, given if you look around the city at any given time, there's so many cranes in the air, that could have a significant impact using technology to actually validate what the true value proposition is.
Thanks, Minister. Yeah, no, they're very important points, and they're all slightly different perspectives around that issue. Minister, if I might come back to you again, there's a question come through around AI projects in government. The question is, how does the government decide what AI-related projects to advance and fund? Is there a specific process to roadmap out AI initiatives?
Yeah, well, the most important thing I do, Michael, is get super smart people around me to give me advice. And thank God I've got Dr. Ian Aberman leading the team in terms of the AI committee. So they provide advice, Ian and the team, which is based not just on government, but industry and academia as well, to give us advice and guidance on what we should be advancing and in what direction. So, I might defer to Ian on that because he's closer to it than I am.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Minister. What we have found, of course, is that many parts of government are interested in using AI. I talked about transport's wayfinding just a moment ago, but health and education and family community services, justice are all exploring different uses of AI. And ultimately, it's about delivering better policy outcomes, better outcomes for the people of New South Wales. And what we've been trying to do, and as you probably know, Michael, we developed an AI assurance framework which went up to New South Wales Cabinet at the end of last year. And that's a framework for thinking about how you assure projects. So in general, we're seeing many uses of AI. It's from improved efficiency, improved effectiveness, improved personalisation of services. And there really has been a real explosion. So New South Wales has been deliberately but cautiously moving along. We have a policy of pilot then scale. And increasingly, we are finding AI projects in all sorts of areas, and we're looking to assure them so that they're safe for long-term use in New South Wales.
Michael, can I give you a concrete example? I was up at the, I won't disclose to the council, but I was discussing e-planning, and they said that they would like, I don't know if they've made the application yet, but they'd like to use AI to see if they can fast track planning, on the basis that there might be an application or a series of applications that, using a bit of AI, you could understand to a 99.9 degree of confidence that it's going to be approved. If that's the case, can we use AI for particularly the low-hanging fruit to have instantaneous planning decision where there is virtually no risk or no controversy? So that's just an example. Now, that's not rolled out yet, of course, but that's the type of thinking that people are using and organisations are using to improve efficiency and outcome.
Thanks, Minister. That's great. I think that is a perfect concrete example of something that basically AI can be used to automate, to make things, make approvals better, more efficient, and ultimately benefit our stakeholders and the people. I'd like to direct this next question to Fang. Again, the one's come out from the audience. It asks, is there any work for different industries and sectors to share their data with each other and developers, e.g. energy, retailers, suppliers, water utilities, etc., e.g. planning for staggered commutes, pre-filled reservoirs, store energy prior to high energy spot prices predicted due to, say, hot weather events, etc.? It's a big question, so Fang, let me know if you can tackle
thanks,
that one.
Michael, and thanks, whoever raised the question is very interesting. I think we've seen these cross-sector integrations, collaborations that a lot more now. Just the sector you listed, for example, energy, water, transport. We do see quite some work together. Example, electrical vehicle. So EVs, they are using, of course, charging ports. Some, could be the city, could be the home, and could be even part of the battery reserve. So the connections of EV uptake versus the impact towards the grid, overall grid energy consumption, there are works being doing. And we just recently finished the work with Transport Agency and EMO, and then some other, a few things you listed there to, systematically look at the behavior changes of intake EVs, what the impact will have towards the whole network, energy network, by utilizing AI, for example. Thank you.
Thank you, Fang. Thanks for that. We're slowly approaching the end of our time, but I wanted to throw this last question, well, maybe last or second last, from the audience to Gary. Gary, you mentioned in one of your opening statements around COVID. This questioner is saying, speaking of lessons from COVID, do you foresee DHL's use of data, logistics, and UAVs being useful in safely distributing goods, PPE, medicines, and tests in the event of any future pandemics?
Yeah, there's a lot of work going on with UAVs, Michael. We're actually doing some research right now on how we can use UAVs into remote areas to move critical parts, such into mining locations, for example, or into really remote locations. A good example of that is medical supplies into, say, a remote area in Papua New Guinea. So we hear a lot about the use of drones to deliver pizzas, but I think there's more important product that we can use for with drone deliveries. We have 3 innovation centres around the world. They're doing a lot of research on UAVs, and I think watch this space. I think you'll see the use of UAVs in the delivery of very time critical product and parts, etc., to very remote locations. And obviously Australia is a key market for that type of service.
Thanks, Gary. That's great. Look, I'm going to try and be cheeky and sneak in one last question before we finish up to the whole panel. So feel free to jump in. It's basically a question around what people feel are the biggest barriers for smart city adoption moving forward. So maybe if I get a quick response from each panel member just to finish up the session. Who'd like to go first?
Maybe I'll just go first, Michael. Yeah, obviously smart cities. We're not just talking major capital cities either, but what we're seeing, especially with what's happened with that pandemic, is the movement of population and the growth areas even outside of the big capital cities. So I think with like an organisation like DHL, we're seeing the movement of our staff into more regional areas. We're about to embark on a new policy, the future of work, where 50% of your time is in the office and 50% can be at home. And that's highly welcomed by all our staff. So you're going to see the movement of population outside of major capital cities. And I think that's another important aspect when we talk about smart cities.
Very good point. Very, very good point. Any other closing statements from any other panel members?
Michael, sorry to be boring, but I'm going to say...
Sorry,
Minister?
You go, Ian.
Go ahead.
No,
I was just going to say...
I think you were first.
Sorry. Well, so sorry to be dull, but data sharing is still the one we need to get right. But we will get it right. We'll get it right in the not too distant future. Then we can start doing some really cool analytics, some really cool AI, and some really cool optimization. So we just need to get this smart infrastructure in place first. But it's definitely coming.
Thanks, Ian. And over to you, Minister.
Oh, thanks. I couldn't agree more with Ian. You know, we've been on this eternal battle inside of government, particularly around data sharing. That has improved, no doubt, during the pandemic, and we've seen a lot more collaboration. I just had a meeting today about how using Solid as a platform, an open source platform, it can enable data sharing where the individual owns the data, it owns their pod. I think that's a fast way forward. And we need to, I was just at a forum in relation to how we get the city back. And, there is no doubt a migration to the regions, but equally, we need to have more residential in the city CBD. Otherwise, it becomes an office ghost town. So, that way we can model that up in the digital twins to see what is that sweet spot in terms of office, recreation, residential. To make sure that we truly have a livable city that we can then also make a smart city.
Thanks, but it's a very excellent point. Livable city equals smart city. I think that makes total sense. Fang, your last point before we sign off, barriers to smart cities.
Thank you. I think on top of the data sharing, coordinated multi-sector or multi-agency planning operation to generate some of the data-driven decisions. I think that will be super important.
Well, this has been a tremendous session. So much great input from the panel and also the opening remarks from each individual. I really just want to say I wish we could keep going. But unfortunately, we didn't cover all the questions, but we did cover many from the audience today and from those registered. So that's all the time we have for today. But I'd just like everyone to, whoops, my lights have gone off here. In the office, smart cities have not extended to office spaces and smart light sensors. Please join me once again in thanking Minister Victor Dominello, Dr. Ian Aberman, Distinguished Professor Fang Chen, and Mr. Gary Edstein for their time and insights which they shared at today's session and during the panel. I would also like to thank Engineers Australia for partnering with the University of Technology Sydney and making today's webinar possible. We've had an incredible number of registrants and participants, so I hope you enjoyed the session. But we would like to hear your feedback and some feedback on the program today to help us improve and plan future sessions. So please complete a short feedback form, which is linked in the description below. And thank you again for joining us. And we do hope to see you at our next webinar. Thanks, everyone, and thanks to the panel.